Good evening, good evening, good evening. Like, give us a chance to get ourselves together. It is what September. What happened to September? It is. We are halfway through September, and I'm so grateful to have y'all here with us. I'm Jackie Glass, Mama, Navy vet, certified doer, and the laced up legislator for the House of Delegates, 93rd District. Happy to serve. Happy to be here. So here we are. We're back at it again. I told y'all we're doing this every month. We've been at this. We done social media in youth. We done AI. We done childcare, and now we are to that topic that you are going to interface with every day. School is back in session, so so it's happening. Speed cameras, right? This is our policy roundtable on speed cameras. So I hope that you are sitting down in a place where you can. I hope you're not watching this while you're on your phone driving. Don't do that. Put it away. Just don't do that. We're not even do that today. I'm not going to be the reason that you get in trouble, but definitely want to get things going. Y'all know these policy roundtables. This is for you. This is us for you. We bring folks in just to have a little casual conversation about these topics. Now, this one is really interesting. As you probably know, and most of you, if you join us on if you join us on Thursday mornings, then you know that I sit on the committee on transportation. So we're hearing all this stuff, right? Like all types of things. The real cool thing is I get to chair the committee for transportation and innovation. And I looked at that like, what does that even mean? What are we innovating in transportation? And oddly enough, we got to hear bills about everything from towing, but towing actually was really towing and speed cameras, both really, you probably wouldn't think it was a hot topic, but it's a really hot topic. And so today I've got a couple folks that are going to come in and we're going to talk about it because I know some of y'all got that letter in the mail telling you to slow down over there by Booker T. Washington High School. I know you did. So I'm going to bring in a couple folks to help us out. We've got Lauren Gilbert of Advantage Strategies. And I'm going to talk about what she does in a second, or I'm going to let her talk about what she does because y'all try to give this name a bad name. Listen, Lauren, they think that lobbyist is a bad name. And I be telling them that, tell them again, Lauren.
We're just here to help.
Just here to help. And then I've got Chris Kaiser from, and did I say your name right? Is it Kaiser or Kaiser?
Oh, you got it, Kaiser.
Chris Kaiser from ACLU, Virginia. Listen, okay, I'm gonna put us this way, right? So we look at me. Oh, look at you in the middle. For once, I'm not a middle child. For once, I'm not a middle child. Okay. So I first want to give you all the opportunity to just like, who are you? What do you do? Like, and how do you interface with speed cameras? Like, what is that like for you?
Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. So, hi everybody, Chris Kaiser. I'm policy director with the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia. As you might know, we cover a lot of different issues around civil rights and civil liberties, from voting rights to reproductive freedom to criminal legal reform. Within criminal legal reform, one of the things that we have an interest in is the issue of government surveillance and particularly police surveillance. There's a lot of factors that we weigh on a lot of those types of proposals, but generally, we're interested in transparency issues so people understand what technology is out there and how it's being used, invasions of privacy on what types of data and information are collected about all of us, and then some due process questions about when that technology is out there, what are our rights against it being abused against us, whether it's being deployed in discriminatory ways, things like that. So I've worked on a range of different policy issues related to facial recognition and automatic license plate readers. And today we're talking about speed cameras, but I'm happy to talk about any of this as it comes up. And thanks for including us, Delegate.
No worries. Lauren, what you do?
Yeah, Delegate Glas, thank you so much for putting this on. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Gilbert. I work for a group called Advantage Strategies. I'm a government relations associate at Advantage, and that is, some people would say it's a fancy word for lobbyist, but I promise you, we really are here to, help people figure out how to interface with government because, the General Assembly doesn't meet full time. We know delegates like Jack Glas are out here doing the work full time, but they're not at the General Assembly full time. So we're here to help people monitor what's going on, make sure their voices are heard, make sure that, delegates and senators have an understanding of policy issues that they might not be as familiar with. In my role at Advantage Strategies, I'm a member of the lobbying team for the city of Richmond. And the city of Richmond, we specifically work with the city council side. The city of Richmond, sadly, has had some really high-profile pedestrian deaths in the last couple of years. And so they are really interested in ways, that we can reduce instances of speeding in the city, but also cognizant of things like police interaction with civilians and citizens. And residents in the city. So kind of trying to strike that balance. But the city of Richmond last year had legislation to expand the current authority around speed cameras. It did not pass, but we've gotten some more data and some more information in the last year. And so we're kind of interested in seeing where we might be able to expand that authority and hopefully make our streets safer for the people using them, especially pedestrians, cyclists, and people who aren't in cars.
That's the tough part. So for context is, I get to sit in here along with you all in those committees, y'all. So like the committee, just to be like, so that if you don't understand what happens is when, and if you don't understand, you need to be going to summer school for certified doers so you can learn the process. But I'm going to give you a little bit of it here, right? That what I like to think of my job is having three constituents in a sense. I've got general public, I've got the city of Norfolk, and then I have Norfolk Public Schools. Those three constituencies have different wants, needs, and drive. And so even like in the city of Norfolk, we have people that come like Lauren that come to Richmond and say, hey, like, here's what our city wants, right? So it doesn't matter. Actually, I keep using Norfolk and I see all kinds of people. So, hey, Vic, hey, Only, Misha, hey, Zan, all these people all over the place. I see you guys in there. That they have things that they want and they need, right? So speed cameras just happens to be a really super hot topic. I know this last session my first session, I had 2 resolutions for people that were part of a hit and run, or their lives were, their family lives were completely altered. But also on the other hand, it's like, I'll tell you this, my son got a letter in the mail the other day saying slow down in a school zone. Who doesn't want that, right? But there's a lot that comes with it, and I think that's like kind of what we want to talk about today. So you have the opportunity, y'all, to drop your comments in the chat, like as they come along. If you have questions, you have comments, you have concerns. I mean, what do you think about speed cameras? Do you think they're necessary? And don't get big mad if you're doing the speeding, but there's so much to think about. So Chris and Lauren, it was exhausting. Mm-hmm. I just want to really honor the fact that like we're doing this work because people have needs and people want and need representation on all sides. I think there are the 2 sides that we sit here with, right? Like we got to have safety, but also do we need Big Brother doing safety? And I'd love to why, I mean, like, not why do you think it's important? I know it's super important, but like, from your lens, are we on the right path? What are we doing? What are we even doing here?
Yeah. Chris, do you mind if I kind of kick this one off and then pass it over to you? So a couple of years ago, Virginia allowed local governments very limited authority to use automated speed enforcement. And I think like things like this are about education. So I want to clear up a couple terms that you might hear sometimes, so that way everyone knows what we're talking about, and then specifically what we are not talking about. So there are a couple of different things out there. One thing that people hear about is something called license plate readers. Right. That is, technology that is monitoring every single license plate that goes past that camera. It's constantly running. It's collecting that data. It holds it for a long time. That is not what automated speed enforcement is. So all of that stuff can go over here. That's not what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. There's also just general like surveillance. So there are companies that do things, as technology gets more advanced, they do things like they'll put up, technology that can try to detect like gunshot monitors, and they're doing constant scanning of neighborhoods and things like that. Again, that is not automated speed enforcement. That's not what speed cameras are. Speed cameras, automated speed enforcement, is a passive technology. So this technology only triggers, it only operates when someone is going, I think it's like 10 or 11 miles an hour or more over the speed limit in a designated area. And that, that's what automated speed enforcement is. So again, I think sometimes we hear things like license plate readers, and I totally agree. Like, I'm very skeptical of some government surveillance and how wide it can go and what that means for our civil liberties and our civil rights. All that is a little bit different than the speed camera conversation. So I just want to kind of put that out there. Is that okay,
Yeah.
Delegate Glas?
No, that's perfect, because that we these go in buckets, and I think it's perfect that. And you saying it passive, absolutely, that people kind of need to know what we're dealing with. And to be honest, like some of y'all, if you've passed, they look much different than the license plate readers that sit up a little bit higher, and you're really only going to see them in one place in your city. And I want to acknowledge Lisa saying, "Oh my goodness, we need them badly." in Norfolk, they're here though, so we have them. It's the crux of where to put them. Right. So for Steve, what are the proposed locations? We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's very narrow where we can actually put them. So yeah, I want to just,
just some level setting there so everyone kind of knows. And Delegate Glas, thanks for allowing us to do that. In Virginia right now, local governments have the authority to put speed cameras in two different kinds of places. The first is at like schools where they already have those school zones. And that is having them operate only during those times that the school zones are running. So again, it's not all day. It's not like 24 hours. It's when you have those, school buses coming in, the kids walking to school, people leaving. So again, it's when there's a lot of pedestrian and other traffic in those school zones. And again, a lot of like vulnerable people trying to get to and from a place they got to be, an important place to be. And a way we want to keep our communities safe. The other place that speed cameras can be deployed is in work zones. So again, that is places where we have like people out trying to do their jobs, trying to improve our streets, trying to improve roads. We already have signage around slowing down, around being aware, putting down those cell phones, right? All the signs about like, hey, this is someone's, essentially their office. Would you speed through someone's office? So that is where the authority exists right now. That authority has existed for a couple years, but the reason we're starting to see speed cameras now is because there's always a little bit of an enactment delay. So between the time the General Assembly is meeting and they pass legislation, and then local governments are adopting their budgets and going through the process where they say, okay, this is an idea we can do. We're going to allocate money towards buying speed cameras and setting this up. That's one kind of delay. And then you get another little bit of a delay when local governments are going through that procurement process. So looking at vendors, figuring out, doing speed studies, seeing where these might be feasible, where they might make a difference. But that's a little bit of a reason why we're seeing these now, because this authority, again, has existed for a couple of years, but we're hitting that point where local governments have had a time to have that cycle play out and actually get those speed cameras up and running.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge to everyone that is why we are always helping on understanding how the process works and where to interject, because you don't want to come in too late. I don't know that there's a such thing as coming in too early, but you can come in a little late and things have already been enacted and this local government has already allocated money to go one way or another. And there's a timeline for that. And if you don't know this stuff, again, I'm going to say you need to be at summer school. Okay. Right? Because you can't, it's like a cake, right? Chris, Lauren, I feel like it's like a cake. Once that cake goes in the oven, you can take it out at 10 minutes, but you can't unbake what's already been baked.
There's just limited options at that point.
Yes. And so that's where we're kind of at legislatively. There's been a lot of cooking over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of cooking, but there's also a lot of concerns in what the ingredients that might have been put into that cake. And so now we're trying to get the frosting right, okay, and the decorations, everything on the side of the cake. And I think that's kind of, Chris, where you come in with like the other side of this is like understanding that there is policy that has been enacted. We're still trying to, we're always trying to fix or amend. I'm going to say that word again. Amend is when we're trying to change things, make changes to existing law, because when you know better, hopefully you do better. We're trying, hopefully that's what we do. I can't say that's always the case, but there's always in the back of my mind the human factor in the things that we do. So on your end, Chris, Lauren, I interrupted you. So I'm just making sure you got a full thought there.
No, thank you, Delegate Glas. Frankly, you're just making me hungry with all this cake talk right at dinner time, but that's fine. The only other thing that I'll say is, at least on behalf of the city of Richmond, what we're looking at right now for 2025 is not expansion of speed cameras everywhere. Again, local governments don't get to just decide, oh, we're going to have speed cameras on every street, on every corner, at every intersection. Frankly, they're kind of cost prohibitive. This technology is not, it's not just like sticking up an iPhone and getting data, right? It requires quite a few steps.
Yeah.
The city of Richmond right now, we're looking at and hoping for some legislation that expands the authority of essentially that school zone authority to college campuses.
Yeah.
So the city of Richmond, of course, has VCU and VUU. Don't want to forget our HBCUs, but they're both really integrated in our urban landscape and in that urban footprint. We have a lot of students walking around, and sadly, we've had some really high-profile deaths in the last couple of years that were related to speeding. Richmond has conducted some speed studies. The VCU has conducted speed studies, but we really think that with the authority to put speed cameras in some places that are related to college campuses, that will help make the students in Richmond even safer. So that's sort of the limited place we're looking for right now. There's a lot of ideas about ways we can improve it, but that's the direction that the folks I'm working on behalf of are working on. But we're also, again, there's a lot of skepticism and it's not undeserved. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you. And I know I've been talking quite a bit, but turn over to you to have your say.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. It's all well taken. And I should say, off the bat, this is an interesting issue and like particular technology for us to talk about, in part because I'll just say up front, we're neutral on this. Like we were not an opponent of automated speed camera enforcement at the GA, despite the fact that, as Lauren kind of alluded to, we as an organization, we generally come from a place of skepticism around automated enforcement of things in general and government surveillance. So I'm happy to say a little bit about how we arrived at this kind of neutral position. I mean, no, go ahead, Delegate.
I was going to say, I think it's important for people to understand that, right? Because they look, you represent an organization, each of you represent an organization. Chris, I don't know if would you be considered a lobbyist too?
Yes.
Or you would just be, yeah, okay, got it. I'm just making sure, right? I'm making sure, both lobbyists. I need y'all to understand this because I don't want y'all to get at nobody's neck, right? Coming from different lenses on the work that happens. And when we're trying to, as a person that chairs a committee, I'm going to hear a lot of people, a lot of opinions when I go to sit down and gavel in. One of the most important roles is having people like Lauren and people like Chris, for you to be able to say I'm neutral, y'all, that says a whole bunch. That makes it kind of harder sometimes, because oftentimes you're working with people that sit on one side of an issue or another. What I think that tells a person like myself and hopefully the general audience is that you're weighing a lot of different things. And if you're against it, then you've got your argument and you know why you're against it. If you're for it, you got your argument, you know why you're for it. And you're able to tell me what the other person is thinking too. So to be neutral is a very interesting place to be as the ACLU, as I know, you all 100%. And I don't know if we got a chance to talk. You did say what the ACLU does, but yeah, go ahead. So how do y'all come to the position of being neutral on the speed cameras?
Yeah, for sure. And I want to be clear too, being neutral as opposed to supportive for us is really more of a function of we don't have the expertise to talk about pedestrian safety and things. We're a civil rights and civil liberties organization. So we come from a place of trying to defend those fundamental rights and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And so I don't think we would be the credible person to say this is the research bears out that this protects pedestrians or doesn't. But we can analyze at least whether this is a threat to privacy and civil liberties. And where we landed on this is not so much compared to other forms of surveillance technology. If you just to zoom out a little bit, we've got like the Fourth Amendment, the protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government, by the police. The idea of that is to protect against kind of like arbitrary invasions of privacy. And one of the reasons that surveillance technology can pose a threat to our civil liberties, not just under the Fourth Amendment, but like the right to free speech and to associate freely with organizations and people that we want to, is that the more information that the government has about all our habits and everything we do on a day-to-day basis, the more possibility there is to prevent us from doing those things, right? If we're a member of a marginalized or disfavored group, if we are suspected of a crime, there's all kinds of incentives for the government to kind of surveil and put a chilling effect on what we're doing. So the idea that you would have this really wide net of information pulled in by the government is potentially really threatening to our civil liberties. Now, a couple things we think about when we're trying to decide whether it crosses the line are things like how much information is being collected about us. How long is that stored? Who all is it shared with? Can every law enforcement agency in the country get to it? Can other private entities buy our data and use it for whatever purposes they want to? How transparent is the local government or the company who runs the technology being about what's happening with that technology and where it's deployed? All of those things, I think, I'm not going to run through the other forms of technology that Lauren mentioned earlier, but I think the answer would be like, yeah, some of those other pieces of technology do pose problems in that way. With speed cameras, they are static. They're not constantly collecting our information. They're, as Lauren said, kind of passive and are only triggered when people are going a certain speed within certain proximity to schools and things like that. So I think the scope of all this and the threat to pulling in all our information and gathering it so that anybody can do anything they want with it is just lessened in this setting. I think that there could conceivably, this isn't a comment about Richmond or anywhere else that has them, but there could be questions about what is this a person's right to contest a ticket if there's a question about whether it's accurate. That's a back-end due process question, but that's not an inherent problem with the technology. That would be more about how it's being deployed in a given jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that's already in the courts right now. Like there's a lawsuit happening here in the Hampton Roads area about that very thing, about being able to contest on the back end. What I'm seeing a lot in the comments, which I think have been answered, and you can drop it in the comments as it has, is where would these be? We talked a little bit about where these would be. I think it's important to also underscore on where they can be, is that there has to have been a fatal accident, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren, within the last 10 years with the current legislation in order to, and it has to be within 175, I believe, feet. And you can check me if I'm wrong, y'all. I can be fallible. I should know this. Within a school zone. I mean, we heard 4 or 5 bills, 1 out of the Senate, and I think 4 in the House, just trying to fix this problem. And it's kind of maddening because it's like when they say we shouldn't say, I was going to say skin a cat. Peter, don't beat me up. Don't want to say that. There are a lot of ways to solve a problem. There's so many ways. There's so many kinds of cakes you can bake. Okay. Like from scratch or I'm just messing. I don't want to get out of it, but there's so many different ways to do it. And the most interesting part, which with this, I'm going to go ahead and put this comment up there, is like, hey, is there any collaboration with the PD on high traffic areas or video camera? So the thing is that there is a lot of collaboration in what is or is not happening. The crux is each locality is really different. And Lauren, you just hit something that's really big. It's like Richmond essentially is a college in the middle of the city. So essentially they would be everywhere. There you go. There you're right. I'm sorry, VU. I remember you. Okay, like you're there. I mean it. But yes, absolutely. So there are 2 calls. So that means pretty much that whole metro area, the downtown sort of area, would be almost everywhere.
Well, we definitely understand that concern, but part of what we're hoping for is that, there's also like responsibility on behalf of the locality when it comes to this. Again, this technology is not cheap. So putting it, yes, VCU is kind of expansive, but there's definitely a lot more to Richmond than VCU, particularly on the south side of Richmond, which, does not have VCU properties, does not have college properties. That's a conversation for another day, but also has quite a few instances of speeding and, less infrastructure because it's traditionally a less affluent part of the community. And, because of a lot of legacy racism, the south side of Richmond gets a lot less attention than other parts of Richmond does. But, the campuses are a limited space. But again, we're also looking at things like responsibility on behalf of the locality, having to do things like speed studies, having to do things that demonstrate, okay, actually, this is a location where we have a lot of instances of, speeding and a lot of pedestrians. This is a place where this could make a difference and it's going to be important. I mean, just this weekend, I was coming back from my grocery shopping at Willow Lawn. For anyone, I know it's probably mostly a Norfolk audience, but anyone who's familiar, I was coming back from Willow Lawn, driving down Broad Street, and right down there by VCU and the Siegel Center, literally 2 cars were drag racing down Broad Street on a Sunday afternoon. And there were, students out shopping, running their errands, trying to pick up food, doing their Sunday morning stuff. And that's concerning. That's concerning. And that's the kind of thing that, especially when police offices are having trouble recruiting, trouble retaining officers, they're going through efforts to try to retrain some of their police forces to make sure they're being, thoughtful when they're engaging with citizens. These are things that, it's pretty neutral, right? If you're speeding, you're speeding. And it's not going to be a question of like, oh, well, do I smell something in your car? Or what do you look like? Or what else do I think about you? It's just a matter of like, if you're going too fast, you're going too fast. And so there is a hope that it also reduces instances of some of the troublesome policing that a lot of police departments have been trying to reduce, but also reduces some of that threat. Yes.
So on that point specifically, and this isn't a, not taking issue with any of that, but just a piece of the analysis that I neglected to mention earlier, which I don't know if you could speak to this, Lauren, in the case of speed cameras in Richmond, but I mean, in a lot of cases, surveillance technology, whether it's crime cameras or whatever else, it's often deployed disproportionately in communities of color. And so that very well may not be the case for these speed cameras, but I think that's also a piece of the puzzle that we have to pay attention to, because if they are indeed deployed in an equitable manner, then exactly what you just said should bear out, that it won't discriminate as to who's popped for a speeding ticket. But if they're all like dense within certain neighborhoods, then you get a different outcome, right? So just a piece of the analysis.
Yeah, and Doug Glas, if I can speak to that, some of the data that we've seen that's come out from other states that have had this technology for longer, so they have a little bit more data, is, if there are more instances of speeding, maybe in communities of color, and these speed cameras are in, communities of color, what you see when you get that data is that the people that are continuously and habitually speeding and endangering those residents are not actually residents of those communities. It's people cutting through. It's people that are not part of that community and, again, are like regularly endangering the citizens in that community and the residents in that community. So that's something else that we see in data from other states is that, again, it's not, once it goes up, it's like, okay, you're going to slow down just like you do for a school zone, just like, 3:30, let me, go a little bit slower, make sure there's not kids around, things like that. It's the people that really don't have like a vested interest in the community that then are getting, the notices and then the tickets, and hopefully are either like, maybe if they want to speed, they're avoiding that cut through or that part of the community. They don't want to drive through anymore because they're going to get tagged because they want to speed, or they stop speeding and they stop endangering people.
And you mentioned that piece of notices, and I was saying before my oldest citizen left for college, I got a paper in the mail, okay, with the license plate for the car that he drives saying, hey, school zone, you need to slow down. And it was interesting because he's like, I wasn't speeding. He was going 35, which is the speed limit when it's not a school zone. And I'm going to say this again for y'all. There is a buffer So you have to be doing it, from what we were told, is at least about 11 miles over in order to trigger getting your picture taken. But I thought it was interesting that happened during the summer when school wasn't even in session, and they're trying to prime us to get us ready for the deployment. At least I know in Norfolk, they were trying to prime folks to get ready for that deployment, which is fair.
And I think that's something that we see with, like, there's a lot of differences in vendors and how they go about this kind of work. But in vendors that really have a vested interest in reducing speeding and making our streets safer, they do that warning process because they know, oh, okay, it's part of your routine. It's summertime. It's out of school. They want to give you a warning that there's going to be a change, and give you the chance to, like, adjust your habits and make a difference. And in Richmond, we have seen those warnings make a big difference. And then when the speed cameras were first deployed, I mean, we had, I think it was like thousands of instances of speeding through school zones. And again, that's only a couple hours a day, 5 days a week. That's not full time. This is a big problem, and it's endangering people that are really vulnerable and deserve to use their streets safely. And we've seen it tapering off. We've seen a reduction in the instances of speeding. So those warnings really are designed to help give people the fair warning of, like, hey, FYI, you're going too fast. Got to make sure you're slowing it down now.
Chill out. On the other hand, and Kristen Wheeler, I see your question over there. I'm definitely going to get to it. On that same vein is what happens when I get that ticket and it was after those hours, right? Like, how do I think, Chris, that you sort of talked about that a little bit at the automated justice, which isn't necessarily in the wheelhouse of what you guys are going after, but it's like thinking about, if I am disproportionately receiving tickets, when it's like, hey, they need to get that timing right, because I'm traveling through there at 5 p.m. and I get a ticket and I can't even contest it because it's going through a third party company who is then like, where's the human factor in here to help make sure that, like, I'm not getting a ticket when I'm not supposed to be.
So just in general, and I'm curious to know a little more about your son's situation, and insofar as if it was like a car that is under your name in a registration. Is that what happened? So it came to you?
Yeah, it came to me, but it was appropriate. It was like, right when the high school was summer. So the high school was not in session, but he was going 35. And if during that time, if it was in school, it would have been a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So they sent us a warning just saying, hey, during this time, this is what, just letting you know, you need to be, you're over the speed limit. If school been in session, you would have been over the speed limit.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because it does, it gets to that point. I don't think it's an unresolvable problem by any means, but your point about needing some human correction when we're relying on machines to make these calls, especially when it has to do with any kind of criminal enforcement. Because, like, mistakes can happen. Like, machines are just taking in information and outputting it, right? And so, like, we've seen in the case of license plate readers, for example, it'll be looking for a license plate number, but maybe it's a Florida plate instead of a Virginia plate, and it gets the wrong person for a stolen vehicle, and all of a sudden somebody's arrested, right? Like that stuff like really happens. You see wrongful identifications for things like facial recognition. So, like, anytime that there's an opportunity for the enforcement entity to maybe improperly just assume that the computer is always right, we definitely need like a human element to be there as a bulwark. And so in the case of speed cameras, it probably does take the form of an ability to say, hey, this wasn't in the right time period, and I should have an ability to have a hearing to contest it. And so, like, if there are obstacles to making that work smoothly, we should have that conversation. But again, I don't think that's like inherent to the technology that would be an issue.
Yeah. And so what I think I'm not worried more about, or what I'm trying to hold in my hands as we walk our way into the fourth quarter of 2024 and roll right into session, is like, we can't not take those things into consideration when people are pulling at both of our head and our heart on how we legislate these sorts of things in localities. Like, have to take that in consideration, but also the human factor goes both ways. I think Lisa just said it. What about my right to safely walk across my street? And then that other neighbor, like, what about my right to be like, it wasn't me? Shaggy that bad boy. It wasn't me. So like, what about that? Is there's a lot to consider when these things are coming to our doorsteps. But I want to read a question we have on Instagram over here from Kristen Wheeler. She said, can speed camera footage be used by agencies other than the local police? Are cameras constantly on, or are they only triggered to record in instances of speeding? I know you just joined us, Kristen. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but Lauren, do you want to give her a little quickie on that question about how it works?
Yeah, so you said it was Kristen. So Kristen. Crystal, sorry. We got like Kristen. Okay, good. Kristen. So number one, no, they're not recording all the time. It's a passive technology. So they only, and it like, we say cameras, but it's like a photo camera, right? It's not like a video camera. It's like a photo camera. So it's taking that snap picture. It's positioned to only take a picture of the back license plate, not the front of the car, not the driver. And it's not running all the time. And what was the first question? I know it was like a couple.
Can it be used by any other agencies outside of the local police?
I believe it's just used for local police. And in fact, the photos take up so much data that a lot of these vendors actually delete the data after 30 days. So there is a chance, and there's like Doug Glas in a minute, if you want, we can talk some about at least what I understand the appeal process to be. But like the companies are not holding onto this data full time, just like your phone storage fills up and it's like, okay, let me delete some of those old photos. I don't need those screenshots. I don't need anymore. They also have data storage concerns and they're not keeping this data forever. They're keeping it till a certain point after the appeal date and then they're getting rid of it because they don't need it.
Yeah, and that's something I think too, and even in Chris's world, we have with this is not speed cameras, but like with the automated license plate readers and things like that, there's a whole conversation of how long do you keep people's stuff, yes. Right? They're like that. You don't get to keep my information in perpetuity. It's also just not advantageous to keep all of that information all the time. So. Kristen, I hope that answered your question. I did have Steve Dye said, if you're seeking on the ground knowledge of speeding problems in areas from civic leagues, you may have more of an impact slowing cars down outside of the school zones, the beach accesses, and typical incident areas. I can say this. Listen, Lauren and Chris, I started my life in the civic leagues. I hope you guys are familiar with what civic leagues are. I'm sure of it. And if there's one thing that came up consistently, it's speeding. It's speeding. I mean, literally had neighbors that would go to another neighborhood and be like, see, they put up speed bumps here and we can't have them here. And it's like there's so much that goes into the planning of the city and where we can have things and where we cannot. Is it a bus route? Is it close to a fire station? There's so much. And I'm not saying that to blow smoke up nobody's behind. I'm really not saying that. I'm just saying that the easiest answer is to say we can put speed bumps everywhere. And that unfortunately is not the case. We can't just go throw up. And let me say this too, because we had the conversation, the difference between a speed bump and a speed hump, because those are two different things, right? One's temporary. But yeah, like the civic leagues definitely know what's happening. And I love this, Steve. You also said Easy Pass has a assessment program for these kinds of reporting. Yes, they do. They do. And so that's why I think to Chris's point is that there should be we're hoping that there is a process, but like there's also a case in court right now still sort of, and we're waiting, honestly, and I've talked to the chair of transportation. It's like we're kind of watching to see what happens here, because there's precedent sometimes that says we don't like to legislate when we know something is happening in the courts and fix that one way or another, right? We like to let it play out and see, and then move forward from there. And I'm making sure there's nothing else here.
If I could just
go for it.
Oh no, go ahead. I just want to make one quick observation, kind of because the Civic League comment called this to mind. This is a little bit tangent to the technology question, but I do want to just like recognize it because I think it's important. Often when we're talking about public safety, it's just like a topic of policy conversation. Mm-hmm. We're talking about like violent crimes and things that should like really deserve our attention. But often that conversation gets subsumed by some other things that are like really public health problems, like drug addiction and homelessness, that like the things that should better be addressed in ways other than the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And stuff like this, that, as you're saying, Delegate, is like really top of mind for the communities that are affected. Like pedestrian safety, people are like dying because of this, and it gets excluded very easily from a conversation that's usually about like being tough on crime, but kind of generally. So I just like wanted to recognize that, and I appreciate that we're including this within a public safety conversation.
That's real. That's real. And I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like I have to be meticulous with my words, right? As to not make people that are very passionate about this feel as if it's being downplayed, because it is not. It is not. We take it with the seriousness. But I think that's fair to say. It's like, yeah, we just want y'all to fix speeding, and y'all keep talking about people breaking in cars. Like, I believe it 100% is a yes and conversation. It's a yes and I would be wrong if I didn't say, as a state representative, there is only so much that I can do with there's only so how do I want to say this? I can't tell the local government what to do unless we're talking Dillon Rule, okay? And if you don't know what Dillon Rule is, I'm going to tell you, you better come to summer school and you better start learning with us, okay? So Dillon Rule means that in this Commonwealth, localities kind of get their permission for things that they can or cannot do from the state level, right? However, localities operate differently and have some leeway to do things. So I'm not Big Brother. I can't come in and say, hey, City of Norfolk, y'all going to do this. Unless the entirety of the General Assembly says this is what can or cannot happen in that locality. That is the day-to-day operations of that particular locality. However, just like the other folks, is like, I could be an advocate one way or another, just like my neighbor. But I think that there's a high level of frustration. And I think you hit on something so important, Chris. It's like, we care. we care probably as loud as you do. But sometimes things move at the speed of funding. Sometimes they move at the speed of trust. And sometimes they move at the speed of meetings and votes. So it's just really understanding where we get into this process. And now is the time, if you care about speed cameras and you care, this is the time to be hopping in the conversation about it and getting in the know. I definitely, let me make sure. Kristen Willer said, thank you all for doing this. We appreciate you. We appreciate you too. Next question here. This might not be the right form, but how much does the entire system cost? Like equipment. I don't know that lawyers, adjudication. I don't know that we know all of that. Like that'll be a locality question.
That is a locality question. And I'm sorry, I don't know the total cost. I can say that these cameras are really high technology. And, some of it also goes into studies about like, oh, is there like a median that this can be put safely in that can get can take pictures at the angles we want. So it requires like public works studies. It requires laying some, electric lines and things like that. But again, they're not cheap. But you're also looking at, there are other costs of reducing things, reducing speed in other ways. So whether it's like curb bump outs or speed humps or speed bumps or, little signs that flash red when you're going too fast, things like that. So I think you'd probably have to check with your local government, and maybe like the local public works or even your city councilor can probably connect you to more information. Some of it's vendor specific too, so depending on what vendors. But I think all the RFPs, the requests for proposals for things like that, are public information. So I bet if you do enough digging in your, City of Norfolk, City of Richmond, wherever, that website, you're going to get some information. Yeah. Delegate Glas, could I go back to what Steve Doty said about EasyPass having a contesting program?
Oh, 100.
So Steve, I'm really glad you pointed that out, because right now, as I understand it, the way to contest these speed camera instances is the same way that you would contest something with EasyPass or a toll. So like, let's say, I don't know, like my boyfriend was driving my car and he went through a toll, or I didn't have enough on my Easy Pass and I went through, and whatever. It's the same technology and it's that same process. So the way I understand it is it has to be reviewed first by someone in the company. So whatever the vendor is that your locality is using reviews that ticket and says like, okay, yes, the time, the date, we have a picture, like they do all those check boxes. And then it goes to the local police department, and a sworn officer has to review it and then sends it to you. So there's a little bit of a question about like, okay, if you don't pay it, there's a second notice, how that happens. That's where the lawsuit is right now. So it's like a little bit of a downline issue. But there is, excuse me, there is a mechanism to challenge that, especially if we think it's malfunctioning, if you think, if it wasn't you driving the car, et cetera, et cetera. So just like with, tolling, sometimes that technology is not 100%. Again, we know that speed cameras might have some instances of like not totally getting it right 1,000% of the time. Right now, there are some instances or some mechanisms to like appeal that if you have concerns with it.
Yeah, and then Rusty West says speed tables are for roads with higher speed limits. You are right, Rusty.
We got some experts here, Delegate Glas. You really brought out the big guns.
I'm looking, and somebody said, sorry for asking. We don't apologize. So I'm going to say to Kristen, because she's got a couple questions, is we don't accept apologies for asking questions. I do not accept, because it's not needed. Like, this is the space to do it. And her question was, our emergency service exempt from the Dillon rule? No, I don't. I think you're saying is it that when it comes to emergency services, the Dillon rule doesn't matter. You can correct me if I'm wrong. What the Dillon rule says is it can be anything. It can be about whatever topic it might be. In particular, the General Assembly is the one who determines the powers and authorities that the localities do or do not have. And so sometimes we say, you know what, that is a local, the locality has the right to do X, Y, or Z, or take a position on that, or how they do that business. The locality can option. They have the options. We do options sometimes. Sometimes we tell localities to do, and we don't give them the money to do it. So like, it's really one of those things where, like, even if it's something with regards to emergency service, there's legislation that said a locality must do this. Then if the state says they have to do it, they have to do it. If the state say you have to request at the state level to do it, then that's the way you have to do it. So it is I hate to say that it's a hierarchy, but it is a push and pull about what sometimes you all, and I'm saying this because sometimes y'all get mad at the city and they can't even do it. You got to yell at me, right? You got to come yell at me to go yell at the folks I work with to tell them, like, look, my city wants to do this X, Y, or Z. So that's why it's important that we stay really engaged on these local issues, but then understand when it's time to go talk to, am I breaking up a little bit? Okay.
It's just a little slow, but we can hear you.
Yeah. Understand when it's time to take it up to the next level of government in order to get something done. Barking up the right tree is just as important as barking.
Yeah. And Kristen, sometimes like you'll hear some other phrases thrown around. So one phrase you'll hear when like local governments are looking for the option to do something, sometimes you hear that's like permissive legislation. So it's sort of saying, oh, local governments are permitted, they have permission to do this, but then it goes to them to decide if they're going to do it or not. If it's different, sometimes it's called prescriptive. So the state is saying you will do this, local governments. And so what at least for me, I represent as one of my clients, the city of Richmond, we're hoping for some expanded permissions around speed camera authority. Again, not for the states come in and say, you're going to put them here, you're going to put them here, but allow local governments who like know their neighborhoods the best to go in and say, okay, this is where this can make a difference. This is where we'd like some help. So,
yeah, and I think that speaks, I can't remember, someone else said that is like, where can they go? Where can't they go? So we are winding down, making sure that I'm not missing any questions. Oh, Lisa, I heard you. I saw you. That I know sometimes I've been on the receiving end of someone feeling like I don't care. And I know your feelings are 100. I want to say they're 100% valid, right? And that it is your showing up here as a part of advocacy, and it doesn't stop. No matter, it should not stop. No matter how you feel, folks feel. I feel like am I breaking up? I'm making sure I'm not. I don't hope I'm not.
We can still hear you clearly.
Hear you.
Video's a little choppy, but we can hear you.
Copy all. I appreciate that. So I hear you on that. I'm checking for other questions. Thank you. Oh, Kristen says, thank you all. I love when citizens are given the opportunity to learn. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. So to that end, as we sort of get to the so what now what, Lauren and Chris, we're going to have to go back to Richmond, or, well, you guys are already in Richmond, I think. I'm going to have to go back to Richmond and make some, hard decisions and advocate. And I'm going to move myself because I see what's happening here. I'm going to have to go back to Richmond and be able to hear this all over again. I'm imagining that it's just because I sit back in a dark room, guys, and I'm getting myself together. Sorry. I feel it. I see it. So we're going to go back to Richmond, and this is going to come up all over again. In what vein, we don't know, because I don't know what what legislators are thinking and how they are thinking that they want to pull the legislation together. And I'm hopeful that we get a chance to talk with folks that are thinking about bringing these speed cameras bills back. But in best case scenario for each of you, what do you hope to see happen with the speed camera bills? Or the Lauren, you sort of hit it, so you can say it again. Say, look, I'm saying it for my city, and I'm saying it for my city.
Yeah, thanks, Delegate Glas. Well, and I just want to say a couple of things before I'll wrap and turn over to Chris and you. But number one, thank you for doing this. I think, again, like, education is so important, and it's not always easy to stay educated on these issues. They move so fast, and they're always changing, and there's a lot of like misinformation or half information out there. So it's nice to be able to like actually have a conversation about issues like this. For everyone who tuned in, I know that sometimes you're tuning into something like this because you just care about it, but a lot of times people end up getting engaged in this issue because they've been personally affected by it. And if that's you, if you live on a street or have to travel a street that you feel like isn't safe, some people have been hit by cars. Some of us have loved ones who have been hit by cars, or we've been hurt, or, if you have someone who's sadly like passed away due to traffic violence, I just want to say, like, I'm so sorry. And thank you so much for showing up for something like this. I know that it's hard, and we really rely on your voices and your stories. So just thank you for participating in something like this. And I just want to see that and recognize it. For us, for the city of Richmond, again, I think like a lot of cities in Virginia, it's kind of the same story we're all feeling, right? There are more people speeding. It feels less safe on our streets. It's hard to have, police officers everywhere we need them. Should this even be something that police officers as individuals are doing? Are there ways that we can make our streets safer, especially for people that are in vulnerable communities, in a way that is like a little bit neutral, reduces instances of potential violence? And so for the city of Richmond, I think we're hoping to see some expanded authority for local governments to decide where they should be putting speed cameras, where they'll make a difference, and also like demonstrate that with some data and have that like supported by studies, not just everywhere, but in some places where it could really make a solid difference. But Delegate Glas, thank you for putting this on. Chris, it was great to spend time with you on this roundtable. I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, and I can jump in as well. I will second what Lauren just said first about like just having the space to talk. We were kind of like getting on a few minutes before this started, just saying like I think a lot of people might not realize just how few degrees they are removed from decision makers in Richmond, and seems like a pretty well informed group. So maybe not folks on this call, but like Delegate Glas, this is like really, really helpful to kind of break down any barriers that are there. So thanks for doing this too, and for including this. As far as 2025 session, I mean, for anybody who wasn't on at the beginning, I had kind of led by saying at the ACLU, even though we're generally skeptical of government surveillance and police surveillance issues, we're neutral on this one. I expect that would remain the same as we go into this, even as we express greater criticism of other things like automatic license plate readers that can like really gather everybody's data and then be available for police to get many days or weeks or months after the fact. In this case, I will say one thing that we'll kind of continue to look at. I don't think it's a concern at this point, but a lot of the hardware, like the tech hardware that we're talking about, it is adaptable for a lot of different purposes. And so I think one thing that we would always want to see is like the purpose, the use case that we're okay with today is the use case that we, and I think the GA, intends to be okay with next year and the year after that. We don't want to craft policy and statute that would permit different add-ons and new kind of features and emerging technologies to be added to technology as it's deployed into the community. So I think that the legislation I've seen accomplishes that just fine in this case, but it is something we're always looking at whenever we're talking about a new technology out there. So thank y'all.
Yeah, and piling on, that is, if Max was on here, Max is out in the ether. That is something, and Max is our legislative director who's always keeping us on top of, changing technology and things like that. Is something that I think concerns me the most with, consider my background considered and the folks that I work with, is that the thing that we're looking at today is making sure that at least from my level, that people continue to use it and not use it in nefarious ways, and not use it with the objective to add on in a way that will violate privacy or civil liberty. Like that is a thing. And we want to always come from a place of do no harm. And we want the folks that are curating it or procuring these things to understand the capabilities and to where certain things, especially, and I know we're not talking about ALPRs, but that one in particular, the potential that this technology has is just as important as acknowledging and being on top of as how we're using it today. And so my hope is that as you all continue to find your thing, like maybe this today wasn't your thing, but you liked learning about it, that you find your thing. Not a person within the sound of our voices can change the world. If you're telling yourself you can change the world, you're fibbing, but you can change your corner. Right. And when you change your corner and we each choose our corner, that means we are essentially collectively changing our world. So narrow the scope, find the thing. Don't tell me, and don't say I'm about tell me that, narrow that scope down to, if it's this, then narrow the scope and come into the conversations. And I hope you find that thing before January. If not, just keep in tune with us. We'll give you some ideas and then you'll give us some and we'll do great things. Lisa, I want to acknowledge all the comments that you had here. Thank you so much for being super engaged, and Rusty and Kirsten and who else did I see on here? And Zan and who am I missing? Steve. I can't forget you, Steve. I think you'll like this point, Lauren. Lisa said, happy to hear that Richmond is leading. But until next time, before this can actually, I'm gonna pop off here for a second, but I'm making sure we don't have any other questions, comments. But thank you all for coming this evening. We'll have one more roundtable coming up here at the last one is on election administration. So that'll be coming up next month. And then that'll be our last policy roundtable for the year. We may do some little things here and there, but if you have ideas, go ahead and DM us, drop it to the office. We do our best to show up and educate, advocate, celebrate, and legislate with you, for you, and by you. Thank you. Take care, Rusty. Have a good day. Hold on, you guys. Hold on. I'm going to end the stream.